Hiya folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and if you're even remotely online these days, you're probably at least somewhat aware of a little game of fisticuffs that took place between a 58-year-old man and a human turd with a beard. Of course, I didn't want to make either of these guys since one terrifies me
I want to eat his children.
and the other gets too much attention as it is, so instead I made a broccoli punching a hot dog. Which of course means I need some appropriately colored clay. Red for my wiener and green for my broccoli. That being said, a wiener should never be a solid red, so I'll add a little brown to the mix, which will leave me with sort of a terracotta color that I can then wrap around a long tube of aluminium foil. And with that, I've now got a wonky but accurately colored wiener ready to be gently caressed until it's nice and smooth. I'll then add a wiener accurate tip and slap on a pair of nitrile gloves to add some fleshy wiener texture thanks to the gloves' pre-installed texture tips. By gently poking and prodding my wiener, I can impart a nice surface texture before throwing it into the oven to cure so it remains nice and hard while I add the detail. Of course, I may have been a little premature in throwing my wiener into the oven as I need to remove a section to add the face, but it should be easy enough to cut said section out and replace it with some soft malleable clay into which I can poke some eye holes to fill with eyes and a mouth hole that I'll eventually fill with mouth bits. For now, I'll make those eyes angry by adding angry eyebrows before adding those aforementioned teeth to the top lip, and then I can add a tongue to the bottom. Then, once I've cleaned the face up, I can start to add some momentum. I want this scene to be capturing the point of contact between the broccoli's fist and the hot dog's face, so I'll add some concentric hot dog meat rings spreading out from the side of the face, pushing the fleshy skin off to the side. Then some final finishing textures on my sausage's face, and it's time to make some buns. And to get a nice hot dog bun initial coloring, I'll mash together some yellow and white. This then gives me a nice fresh dough-colored clay that I can roll into a hot dog bun shape and bifurcate, softening the edges and adding a tiny bit of bread bun detail before aggressively poking the inside with a well-used toothbrush to give it a nice airy, bready interior. I'll then wrap it around my wiener in a loving embrace, adding that final exterior detailing before baking it in the oven again and drilling some holes for legs. However, once I inserted the first leg, I realized there's simply too much weight and my wiener isn't nearly girthy enough to support the added weight of the bun, so I'll do a little more invasive surgery to install a much improved all-aluminium spine into my wiener to ensure maximum rigidity. With the heavy-duty spine installed and the body baked again to lock it in place, I can reposition the legs and mount it on a sculpting block before building up a thin layer of clay over the legs. I'll then drill some holes for arms and add some spindly little wires that get bent into the proper shape and covered in a thin layer of their very own clay. With the legs and arms done, I can start to add the extremities, starting with the feet, which will be a pair of white boxing sneakers wrapped around the otherwise undefined leg stump. Once I've got the shape, I can add some teeny tiny black laces up the front of each boot, and it's on to making the gloves. The beauty of boxing gloves is that they're like big padded pillows that let two fully grown adults wail on each other's faces far past what the human body should by all accounts be able to endure. More importantly though, they're super easy to make since it's just an oversized fingerless mitten with a thumb and a large wrist wrap. Once I've made two fists, I can fit it onto my freshly snipped sausage arms, and after a quick spritzing of alcohol to remove the fingerprints, that's my wiener basically finished, so it's time to make some broccoli. And as before, I'll start with a color-appropriate clay slapped around an appropriately food-shaped lump of foil. Then I'll clean up the seams and bake it once before drilling some holes for legs. No, wait, that's too many holes, which means that must be the broccoli's top rather than its bottom, which means those are the floret branches. With the curly wires attached and cut to size, I can then wrap them in smaller sausages of clay to create the plethora of broccoli branches, adding extra little ones as I go and blending it all into the pre-existing green body before baking it again and beginning the infacing process. As before, this involves removing the excess clay that I didn't account for before baking and filling it with some fresh clay into which I can add some eyes and a mouth. Then I'll make those eyes extra angry and give the mouth a full set of snarling teeth, but this time I won't smoosh half the face since this will be my punch thrower rather than my punch receiver. Then it's into the oven again so I can drill some holes for the actual legs this time, making the assumption that with the girthier green body, a couple of individual legs will be capable of holding the entire body up. I'll then wrap the legs in some thin layers of green clay and add some thin little vegetable arms up top, angling the arms into an upward angled hook that my broccoli will be throwing against its taller, meatier opponent. Then the broccoli beast undergoes the same process as the bunned one, getting a pair of clean white sneakers down below and a pair of big red boxing gloves up top. All that's left to do then is add the florets to the top of the broccoli, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, I decided to make them out of heavy clay instead of nearly weightless foam flock. To make the florets look like florets instead of mushroom caps, I put some green clay in my freezer to cool it way down and make it much more brittle before throwing it into my coffee grinder and chopping it to pieces. This results in some pretty perfect little textured lumps that I can press into the otherwise far too smooth bulbs on top of the broccoli's head. Otherwise, once I have all the smooth parts covered, I'll use a toothbrush to press the textured clay a little harder into the clay underneath, which will allow me to add pressure without ruining the detail, and then it's into the oven to bake one final time, confident that nothing can go wrong at this point. Due to current agricultural practices and a decline in nutrient-rich vegetables, it seems my calcium-deficient little broccoli legs simply weren't strong enough to support the added weight of the big green afro, and as the clay softened in the oven, the whole body tipped forward, snapping one leg clean off and fracturing the other. Which is unfortunate, but at least it lets me highlight the reality of sculpting with clay. Shit happens, and figuring out how to fix said happenings is half the battle. For the fractured leg, there's still enough connected broccoli tissue to safely close the wound with a healthy application of unhealthy CA glue suturing the wound closed. For the other side, however, we're going to need something a bit more capable of filling the gap inside, so I'll glob some hot glue into the opening and press the detached leg back in place. Obviously, this isn't an option if you want to bake the broccoli again, but this was my last bake, so I'm safe to use hot glue. I'll then work my way around the wound, removing and smoothing any of the sharp sections that are sticking out before filling the gaps and surrounding area with PVA glue, which will let the subsequent thin layer of clay adhere a little bit better. I could use something like green stuff to fill the gaps, but that stuff takes about 24 hours to cure, and this little setback has set me back a little bit, so I don't really have time to wait for a two-part epoxy to cure. Instead, I'll just use the normal Cosclay and blend that into the rest of the body and blast it with my heat gun to cure it. It's not particularly strong, but this part of the model won't get touched much, so it should work perfectly fine. With that little side mission accomplished, I finally got two fighting foods ready to throw down in the ring, which kinda means I need a ring. My first thought was to have these two battling in a casserole dish or on a dinner plate, but I think it would have looked a little too empty with just the two of them, so maybe that's a thought for a future food fight. For now, I'm just going to make a boxing ring out of this piece of plywood cut to size. I think making a full-sized ring's probably a bit too much, but this should be the perfect size for a corner, so I'll pop my pugilists in place and carefully mark out where they're standing so I can drill some perfectly placed holes for their feet. Which, after putting them in place, seems to be nowhere near close enough. So I'll measure and drill again, and...
What? How?
Finally, after drilling far too many footholes, I found the right fit for their feet, so I'll fill the extra holes with some wood filler before coating the entire top in a thick layer of glue so I can glue some cardstock on top. This will both cover the excess holes as well as make for a much smoother surface than the plywood would otherwise provide. I can then set this aside to dry while I get to work painting. I'll start by giving my WEINER a healthy terracotta top coat to add some variation in the color before blasting the center with a darker brown to give it a slightly overcooked look. Before I base the bun though, I'll touch up the inside by painting it white, at which point I can start to layer up the layers of pale orange until I've got a surprisingly delicious looking bready exterior. I'll toast my buns a bit by browning the center, then it's on to the brushing and sponge work where I'll add a bit more char to the chest of the hot dog, as well as add a few highlights to the face and the top of the head. The gloves can get a much redder red base coat followed by a few subsequent layers to make the tip brighter before an aggressive brushing with a fire orange will add the final highlights. I'll clean up the shoes where I oversprayed the bun colors before blocking the camera completely while I paint the eyes and teeth a pure white. Finally, I'll add a little bloodshot red around the eyes and teeth, as well as between the smooshed, punched face skin, and it's time to set the hot dog aside while I make some condiments. To make some ketchup, I'll fill a little cup with some PVA glue and add a dash of red paint and mix it up. Then I can use a pipette to suck the ketchup up and place it gingerly between the wiener and the bun. I'll then repeat this process with some yellow paint instead to give the hot dog a nice mustard swirl on its chest, and it's on to painting the broccoli, who gets a green once over to help break up the monotony of that one-tone green flesh tone. I'll follow this up with some strategically placed yellow highlights which, when layered over the green, will create a much lighter, more vibrant tone on top. For the florets, I've added some white to the green to desaturate it so I can sponge it over the top, then I'll paint the gloves with that same red to orange gradient. This time I'll show the process as I paint the eyes and teeth white, and I'll add a little bruising around one of the eyes so it doesn't look like this is a one-sided fight. Then I'll get the focus on the camera to go absolutely wild while I add the red rim to the eyes and teeth. Then the only thing left to do is add some gloss varnish to both of these fighting foods, and it's back to the base. Now that the glue's dried, I can cut the excess paper off the plywood and poke some holes through the bottom so I know where the mounts go, and I can drill a big hole in the top left corner, which is where I'm going to put the corner of my ring. To make the corner post, I've taken a bit of dowel and drilled 4 holes into it so I can fit some pre-wound extra long wire into the wood. Then using my drill, I'll twist the wires straight. With the wires straight, I'll wrap them in a layer of painter's tape, and once they've all been covered, I'll then use the drill again to twist the wires again, which will leave me with a set of 8 paintable, bendable boxing ring ropes. Finally, I made the corner padding out of clay and painted it white so I can glue that in place before splashing the base with some super watery beiges and browns to make the mat look nice and well worn. Once the mat's had a chance to dry, I can fill the footholes with some hot glue and put my broccoli in place before bending the ropes out of the way so I can fit the hot dog perfectly in place against the broccoli's fist. Now, the astute among you may have noticed that I had to fill the hot dog's holes in again since somehow it still didn't line up after the umpteenth attempt. I did, however, take a minute to make some drool out of UV resin that I'll stick in place with a bit more UV resin to really sell that right in the middle of getting punched look. The last thing to do then is clip the excess off the ropes so they line up with the edge of the mat, as well as bend the ropes that the hot dog is leaning against around its bun, and well, that's us done here, and on to the Glamour Shots. As always, a big old thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon, and a special hey how are you to the newest of them: Grayson Jude, Jordan Garcia, Reaver Snow Leopard, Fizzlazino Scorchese, Sampy, Jay, Shiggy, John FM, Mandy Colby, Austin Hayward, Sarah in the Valley of Darkness, Demonic Dovahkiin, Gengar Morgan, Eric Sutton, and Morty Moo. You are the little red gloves that allow this channel to keep fighting well past its expiration date. Winter is coming, so don't forget to take your vitamin D. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.